So are you able to see it?
Yes, we can.
Yes, very clear.
Okay. So what I'll talk about is the national electricity policy, which is presently there in India, and what should be considered for the future. What should be the philosophy of any policy, whether it's electricity policy or any other policies. I thought I'll just talk about some general principles. It should reflect national priorities. It should be forward-looking. It should be beneficial to the common man, and should be sustainable. I thought this would be some brief points. Maybe later, if somebody wants to point out something which I've critically missed, that could be done. But these are some of the things. Now, what the difference between an electricity act or a law and a policy is that law is mainly talks about the structure of organizations and the functions of power sector organizations which are there. Whereas policies are ones where priorities could be changing. So priorities policies would normally be for about 10 years, or sometimes some things could be changed even earlier, depending on national priorities. It's not moving. Okay, right. So now, what should be the philosophy of the electricity policy? Now, this is a standard, these are the standard three things. They call it the energy trilemma also, which is used everywhere, and so also in India. One is, of course, energy security. And when you talk about energy security, since electricity is a major portion of energy, therefore it could relate to that. The same sort of thing could come. Energy security, you must make sure that everybody gets adequate electricity, or in this case, electricity, of course. Then energy sustainability, it must be sustainable, not that we run out of the policies that we make if we start running out of energy, and energy affordability. So these are, which the last one, you could call it energy equity or energy affordability. So these are normally which is used around the world globally, and so also in India. Just a little background that what is provided by the law in the Electricity Act 2003, it mandates that the central government should prepare the national electricity policy and tariff policy in consultation with state governments and the Central Electricity Authority for development of power system based on optimal utilization of resources such as coal, natural gas, nuclear substances or materials, hydro and renewable sources of energy. Optimal utilization of such resources is what is mentioned. So in the policy that we had, the policy, the first national electricity policy after the Electricity Act came out in February 2005, and it gave a little background that recognizing that electricity is one of the key drivers for rapid economic growth and poverty alleviation. The policy set a target of providing electricity access to all households. Its aim was to provide supply of electricity to all areas and protect interests of consumers and other stakeholders by supplying electricity at reasonable rates, keeping in view availability of energy resources, technology available, and economics of generation using different resources. So this is a general sort of thing. So what has happened over a period of time is, I'll come to that as we go, because the economics of generation has of different resources has changed over a period of time from the year 2005. The areas which are covered in the existing, which is still running, the existing National Electricity Policy 2005, although the revised policy was mandated in the year 2016, they gave the Ministry of Power gave a thing for review of the National Electricity Policy in 2016, and it was ready, and it was presented before the Secretary Power and there were change of secretaries, so the new secretary power, but it's still not finalized. So this is just a background. It covers the areas, it covers the existing policy, which was made in 2005, covers rural electrification, generation resources, transmission sector, distribution sector, recovery of costs of services and targeted subsidies, R&D, technology R&D, competition aimed at consumer benefits, then financing power sector programs, including private sector participation, energy conservation, environmental issues were also considered then, training and human resources development, cogeneration and non-conventional energy sources, because at that time it was not, it was any type of non-conventional energy source as compared to conventional energy source, which was coal, gas and hydro. Anything which was other than that was considered there, which included biomass, solar, wind, etc. Now we term it, we are more, we emphasize renewable sources of energy more. So earlier it used to be non-conventional energy sources, protection of consumer interests, and quality standards. Now, but what has changed after this policy, which has been existing since 2005? Now we have enough generating capacity in India to feed the existing demand. Earlier, there were perennial shortages, and it was always a case of using whatever generation is available. So it talked about exploiting all the resources which were available in India, which was majorly coal. But what happened was that after the Electricity Act 2003 came, that privatization increased due to competition, providing a level playing field. And as of now, private sector owns the largest share of generating capacity when compared to the central government share, as well as when it's compared to the state government share. It was just about 10% in the year 2005, and now it's, I think, 46%. So it has become the large, it's got the largest share. It was the lowest earlier, and there has been not only the Electricity Act, which is responsible, but economics, because when the power exchange came in the year 2008, the power exchange prices were double the price of long-term contracts. And the long-term contracts, if they're priced around 3 rupees, the power exchange prices were 6 rupees per unit. And therefore, a lot of interest came to, because these were real prices which they were seeing. And a lot of private sector participants thought that this 6 rupees or double is going to last throughout the life of the plant, and a lot of private capacity got set up. And many people who had different businesses who were in cement and all thought they'll close down the cement plant and start selling their captive power plant power only to, so they would become power producers. But what really happened was that capacity started growing very fast. And the first time in a particular 5-year plan, where it was going about 20,000-30,000 megawatts in 5 years, it went to 100,000 megawatts, almost about 100,000 megawatts in one of the 5-year plans, which is the 12th 5-year plan. Now there was a time, I mean, now it's a stage has reached when we have so much of coal-based capacity which has come up where it's unutilized. So about 30,000 megawatts of stranded coal-based capacity, and of course the gas-based capacity, which was set up when there was promise of gas from the Reliance KG6 basin, and the output of the gas was increasing. That started dropping and became close to zero, and therefore a lot of stranded gas-based capacity also is now there. And the government is trying to resolve what to do with these, because many of these people are not able to repay the loan, and therefore it just had a very adverse effect on the non-performing assets of banks. And the banking system itself has got affected. So presently there are no official shortages. When I say official shortages, this is from the data provided by the states, where it is close to zero. But we get to know, of course, that what is happening in villages and small towns was that in villages especially, it was the state distribution companies, which are already running into losses, did not have too much of an incentive to supply to these to the villages and rural consumers, because the recovery was very less and the tariffs were very low. So they didn't have too much of an incentive, so they avoided supplying. Even the power was available, they would prefer not to buy the power and supply them, since they were already in losses. So there is, but the amount of capacity which is available, so those are commercial reasons. Even if we include the 40 million households which were considered for not being connected, their average consumption, there would still be enough power, and more, in fact, than what is required. And what has changed is the emphasis on environment. So considering this, there would be change. That has been a change in national priorities of because of environmental reasons. The government is encouraging renewable generation sources. Earlier in the Indian National Solar Mission, there was 20,000 megawatts by 2022, which was planned, and it was ramped up 5 times to 100,000 megawatts when the new government came in 2014. And wind also was substantially increased, and now we have a target of 175,000 megawatts by 2022. We have achieved about 90,000 megawatts. It's a little tough call, but there is a lot of renewables which are under construction, under erection rather. So there has been a policy of shift from fossil fuel driven, also a shift from fossil fuel driven vehicles to electric vehicles. There's been an emphasis on improvement of efficiency of equipment, and of course optimal utilization of resources, which is system efficiency. Now the third point, which is emphasis on efficiency of equipment, is reflected through the PAT scheme, which is perform, achieve and trade, where a number of industries have been given targets that you must reduce your or improve your efficiency. Or in case of power sector, it was to reduce the net heat rate. That's a measure of how much energy is generated per amount of fuel which is used. So they wanted to. Some targets have been given for each power plant separately, and so also for cement plants and many other industries. In optimal utilization of resources, they want system efficiency. So when we were operating when we started in India, states were isolated, except a few states. So states got connected into regions for optimal utilization of power resources, and from region to the national grid. And now, of course, we are thinking of making it a South Asian interconnected grid, which has already started happening. So this is, and the latest amendment in the Electricity Act, which has come, is to recognize cross-border trade in electricity in the Act itself, which would give even more thrust to regional cooperation, what was being talked about earlier. The impacts, what are the impacts on the national electricity policy, refinements which are needed. Now, grid management on account of intermittent type of renewable proliferation, the grid stability would be adversely affected, because solar and wind, which are the prime sources which are being developed in renewables, and they become very cheap. They are intermittent in nature, and therefore they can cause grid stability problem unless you look into various aspects. Therefore, energy storage, which would store energy when there's excess of wind and solar, and give back to the grid when these reduce during the day. Then this is what is now. There is energy storage which should be required on a daily basis, and energy storage over seasons, because even wind energy is mainly during the monsoon season from April to September in India, whereas solar of course increases during the non-monsoon season. So to some extent this complements, but storage would be required. Policy of replacement of fossil fuel-driven vehicles by electric vehicles. This is what should be considered in the policy, because these are things which are reality. This is not only will this reduce emissions, but would also reduce our import bill, where we import 80% of our petroleum products. So earlier, what was mentioned in the earlier policy was minimum lifetime consumption of 1 unit per household per day as a merit good by year 2012. Now we need to supply adequate quantity of electricity supply as required by the consumer to everyone. So when we have catered to quantity, then from quantity we need quality supply. So quality of supply is another issue which would be referred to. As we discussed, Delhi, the voltages have improved, the operating frequency of the grid has improved, and it's very close to international standards now. So these are things which need to be looked at in the renewed policy which is being considered. Just for to give you what was but for the objectives of the 2005 National Electricity Policy, that they had said that access to electricity should be available in the next 5 years, which didn't happen. Availability of power, which was the demand to be fully met by 2012, which again didn't happen, and energy peaking shortages to be overcome. Or supply of reliable and quality power of specified standards, this would still hold now. Per capita availability of electricity to be increased to over 1,000 units by 2012, which didn't happen by 2012, but it's now about 1,200 something. Minimum lifeline consumption of one unit, this I talked about, and financial turnaround and protection of consumers' interest. What could be the new national electricity policy objectives? One could be to provide 24/7 supply to power supply to all houses, industrial, commercial consumers, and adequate power supply to agriculture consumers. Energy and peaking shortages should be overcome, and total reserves also have to be considered, because when this is an international practice of considering at least 15% reserves over the peak demand which is to be met, is what should be there. The quality of power supply, because there are tripping due to forced outage of units, and there is also a planned outage schedule to see that they are maintained. The quality of power supply to consumers would be of specified standards and affordable rates, and achieve financial turnaround and commercial viability of the electricity sector, which is especially the ones in distribution, because that is the one where the revenue collection takes place for the entire power sector from consumers. Tariff reforms is another thing which needs to be considered. Actually, each of this is a subject in itself, because tariff reforms, you have a cross subsidy presently, which is pretty high. So the industries are burdened unduly, and because of that, they're not able to compete internationally. When we talk about Make in India initiative, then that this affects them very adversely. In some industries, it's a major portion, the cost of power, and therefore tariff reforms are needed. Maybe allowing the states to bill all consumers at the cost of supply, and then providing direct subsidy to the underprivileged consumers, which can be given directly from the state government budget and not by cross subsidizing. Now this has been now come out in the Electricity Act 2003, where they are preferred to have direct subsidy to consumers rather than cross subsidy. Of course, it's presently in the draft stage, and there are political considerations. Let us hope it comes through. And of course, there have to be comprehensively designed incentives. As an example, let me just tell you that Delhi gives free supply of up to 250 units per month, and after subsidized supply for little more units than that. And if even irrespective of whether the people are underprivileged or not, or poor or not, and many people who are quite well off get free electricity to this extent of 250 units. Now, what happens is that if Delhi also has a solar policy, which says that rooftop solar PV should be encouraged. But which consumer who's getting free electricity would invest even a single paisa in rooftop solar if he's getting free? So these incentives have to be comprehensively designed. This is an example, but there could be other things. What other areas could be considered is, of course, enhanced generation from renewable energy sources, keeping in view the nationally determined contribution which has been, which the country has promised. Provide an impetus to balancing generation for load and renewable generation fluctuations. Now, balancing generation would become more important when you have intermittent sources of energy. And that's why Nepal and Bhutan present very good complementary sources where they have mainly hydro, which is easily ramped up and ramped down. So they could buy renewable power, or for which we have much more potential than those countries, of solar and wind, and in turn we could get balancing generation from them. There should also be special considerations for peaking power plants, which means that you have differential tariff between peak for consumers during peak time and off-peak time. That's a natural thing, which really hasn't happened. I think one of the reasons is, of course, that you don't have smart meters, because in smart meters you can change the peaking tariff during winter and summer, sitting from one place for all the consumers. Nowadays, it's very impossible to go to each consumer's meter and change it through handheld instruments. Therefore, I hope this tariff would, for generating plants, it has come in the new CRC regulations of 2019 to 24. There should also be ancillary services for taking care of the fluctuations of load and generation, which is called load following or frequency control, and many others. Safe and secure grid operations attention would have to be paid through to this, because of the intermittent generation that we have. To adopt state-of-the-art technology in generation, transmission, distribution, including adoption of smart grid, to see that you have optimal utilization of assets, where you can, through smart meters, have demand response, where the consumer willingly reduces his consumption without inconveniencing himself or herself, if he gets an incentive to do that. And there could be interruptible tariff for interruptible supply, and reliable tariff for reliable supply. So there's quite a lot of things behind that. Have effective demand management, including demand response, which I mentioned, where consumers are enabled, and energy efficiency and energy conservation program. Of course, energy efficiency I talked about also. Optimal utilization of assets, which again I said is the general thing, but about when you balance over a wider geographical area, then there's the fluctuations of wind and solar in one area get balanced to some extent by the fluctuations in another area, and therefore that's again, so balancing over a wider area is one of the ways of optimal utilization of assets. Now, some of the things which are not considered much but are very important for the success of any program is consumer engagement, because policies we make, when people who implement policies are not machines, they're human beings, and therefore that portion, the social side of things, have not been considered. Change management, and of course comprehensively designed incentives. Now, this is something which has been proposed in the new national electricity policy, but let's see when it comes to fruition. Economics of power sector is another thing which was not really being done. When you have two choices of augmenting a transmission distribution system by erecting more lines or transformers vis-a-vis storage, because the peak demand may be coming for an hour or even less than that. So would it be better to put a storage which would store water, electricity for 1 hour or half an hour, rather than strengthening the whole system? Because transmission system is designed for the peak, and if you do that, either you do load shedding or you can have storage. So mandatory cost benefit analysis for whichever is a cheaper option should be done, which has now happened in the case of BSES as well as Tata's, where in the distribution side, when they had to augment, when the load of consumers increased, then now they've decided at 10 places to put storage because it is cheaper to rather than augment the whole system from the whole distribution system, as well as getting right of way permissions, which is becoming more and more difficult. Long-term financing of power projects has already been now considered in different notifications by the government, specifically for hydro projects, because hydro projects, although the life has been considered as 25 years, it's actually only the electromechanical portion, the machine which has a life of 25 years. The civil portion lasts 100 years, and therefore what should be done is that you can consider, and the cost and the civil portion in the cost appropriation accounts for 70% of 60 to 70% of the total cost of a hydropower station. And if that lasts for 100 years, you can replace only about 40% or 30 to 40% by replacing the whole machinery or to the extent required, and run the plant for another 25 years. So you can have long-term financing. One is because presently financing is mostly for 10 to 12 years. So when you have long-term financing, your initial tariff would be lower. This is what people are not, because the initial tariff is higher in a hydro plant, people are unwilling to do that or set up hydro plants. And therefore, this is one thing which would help encourage hydropower plants. And this would be very good for complementing or balancing solar and wind. And you can have backloaded tariff for hydropower plants. Presently, hydro plants are not through competition, through regulated tariff, and what is done is the initial tariff is high, and then it reduces to very less, if you go beyond 12 to 13 years. So it's a steep fall in tariff where people see the upfront tariff versus the levelized tariff. And what needs to be done is also to create a certain segment of people who finance to take care of high upfront costs, which could be of energy storage and electric vehicles as well as rooftop solar. Because if you consider the total cost of ownership of electric vehicles or rooftop solar PV, these are actually, electric vehicle comes out cheaper than fossil fuel vehicle even now. But the point is people don't want to spend that upfront money, and therefore these are not really coming into the mainstream. This is one of the reasons. Of course, there are some other reasons. Similarly, rooftop solar PV, if you take the life of 25 years, the levelized tariff is much lower than the tariff households pay. Then other new players would come in, which are aggregators, which would take the headache of individual households. They could aggregate demand, they could aggregate distributed generation like rooftop solar PV, and they could aggregate even demand response. Now, in Mumbai, they did a pilot project for demand response where it was through an aggregator, and the aggregator collected a number of consumers who were willing to reduce their load, and that was a success. And Mumbai Airport was one of the consumers. Then, of course, capacity building is something which was put in the back burner because the discoms were all running in losses and didn't have enough money to see that people are trained well. Now, when you reform the distribution setup and these become more profitable, then capacity building should be done. Even now, it should be done, and certain minimum qualifications for engineers and operators, because this investment is not too much. They service the enormous amount of savings when you operate these assets properly. A case in point was Bihar. Earlier it was most of their new power plants didn't last the life of the plant also. And of course, there should be recurring sharpening of skills. And some new areas which could be covered would be that all procurement should be through competitive bids. And there are, of course, new power market products. Power markets, real-time markets have already come. Earlier, it was 3 hours ahead. That means if you wanted to buy or sell power, you had to have a gap of 3 hours. Now it has been reduced to 1.5 hours, but this can be reduced further. They're closer to real time. So because especially for wind and solar, where generation changes, you get a better sense of forecasting the closer you are to real time. and therefore they can buy and sell in the power exchange. Capacity markets is another thing which has not been done, although in our report, in CS report to CRC, we had said that capacity markets are ones in which you can sell your capacity, not only energy through the exchange, but you sell your capacity. For example, if Punjab has requisitioned or has long-term contracts with generators because they have high demand during the agriculture season, and that's for just about 3 months. So for 3 months, they use that capacity, and for 9 months, these plants are closed. So now that's idle capacity. If they could sell this capacity for those 9 months to different players, depending on the need, then it would be like those plants, the capacity would be allocated to those other states, and therefore it would reduce the burden on Punjab, because they have to pay the capacity charges. And of course, another one is ancillary services market. I talked about ancillary services market. Thank you.
So, very comprehensive presentation, very, years of experience shows in this, and a lot of breadth and depth also. In terms of renewable energy, what do you see in new energy policy? When do you see that they should also pay for transmission charges that they don't now? So both ways that the incentives given, which should be withdrawn, and those who have not been given, and if they are in infancy stage, they can be liquidated after some time. So do you see that happening, or we will continue that as it is?
No, I see that happening, ma'am, because if you go to the ultimate, very far off, many years ahead, and you find that say 70 to 80% is renewables, then you can't burden all that transmission charges only on the 20%, because that would become make that other cost exorbitant.
But that's very far away, 70%.
Right. Right. So many people are considering 100% renewables also, including Ireland. And I see this would happen by
no, I mean transmission, paying for transmission, I'm saying paying for transmission.
Yes.
Should
so
be
what happens is
70%, that's too late, that's many years later. So,
right. So
I think they should pay earlier.
Yeah, so what the present regulation says that any generation that comes up by 2022 would have free interstate transmission charges for their lifetime, which means that up to 22, anybody who sets up even in 22 for the next 25 years, he doesn't have to pay. So it's quite a thing already, but I don't see this going beyond 22, unless, I mean, there is a thing to see that there is a very strong case for going towards a huge amount of renewables, which I don't think will happen, given that we still have the major electricity produced from coal-based plants. So it's about 70% or so. So I don't think this will happen, because this would these plants which have been set up, many of them are new. These would last for another at least 20 years or so. So I don't see that by beyond 22, there actually was a discussion in the ministry about to what extent to continue, and therefore it was done in stages. It was in some cases 2019 first, and then later made it 22 when they found that there was a little slowdown in erection of renewables. But I don't think that it could be extended for plants which are set up after 2022. We'll have to wait and see, but it depends on the priorities of the government. It's not a good thing to do, because ultimately, if it is not, it gets pushed on to the fossil fuel generators. Anybody who doesn't buy renewables. So maybe
the logic for doing this is that you want to enforce a uniform RPO applications on all states.
That's
different states have different potential for renewable. And if you want to push renewables wherever the potential is, then you have to really, this can facilitate that people state with lot of renewable potential can develop the renewable faster. And I think there is some point in it. If you are saying RPO if you believe that RPO is a good policy in terms of pushing renewables, it of course puts burden on the fossil fuel and other generation. But if you say that, okay, I want renewables shares to increase because it has some other social benefits, environmental other things, then everyone has to share the cost equally.
Right, sir. I agree, sir. There's one more thing which I think would not allow it to go beyond, because now you are having a lot of projects of renewable plus storage together, which has happened in Greenco, and now many others are coming. Now, when you have storage plus renewables at the same point, then your utilization of transmission system is also much better. Because so there, if it becomes renewable plus storage becomes the same cost as coal, then it becomes a very what happens is that renewables, since they utilize its capacity utilization factor is only 25%, on a standalone basis the utilization is very less. And if you put transmission charges on only renewables, then for the others they would be paying around 30 to 40 paisa. These would be paying 4 times more for transmission because it's only 25% utilization. So that's the reason I think what has happened. But if you have solar plus storage, which behaves like a fossil fuel plant, then it becomes not such a big issue.
But then the grid, off-grid would be much a viable solution than grid-based power, because there are even today there are enthusiasts who think that that can go the mobile way, landlines versus mobiles, where energy can be self-sufficient at a location. And then you don't need so much transmission. There are people who believe that. I'm not so much right now one of them, but I'm just wondering sometimes that is it possible.
So to answer that question, ma'am, presently the people who won the bid have won it by solar plus off-river pumped storage or closed loop. Now, pumped storage you can't have in distributed generation. It's only at locations where it can be there, natural reservoirs which are there. So however, if the battery storage costs come down so that the battery plus which can be
it is battery, right.
solar PV, if that, nobody has bid for battery plus storage. People have bid for other things, other sources. So if that happens, then of course this would make great sense, and it would become, yes, if that really happens, then people would prefer to have what is happening in Australia is that they increase the cost of tariffs so much because of the problems that they had in lignite plants shutting down and so that it caused a burden to them, and therefore 30% have gone off grid. Rooftop solar plus storage is coming out cheaper than the tariff. So if that sort of thing happens in future, so that I'm saying that it would also depend on technological developments and their economics in the next few years. So I don't know if anybody can say for sure how this is going to, but seeing the trend, I think things are turning out.
How much, this is just a question, how much do we lose in the transmission process? What percentage of the energy?
You're saying losses, sir?
Losses, yeah.
So losses in transmission is hardly 3%. It's
okay.
The main losses in distribution are in distribution, where for a system like we have in India, you can get it down to 10 to 12%. It depends on the design of the system. If you have long distribution lines, then it go to 12% or something, 12 to even 15%.
That's the one I meant.
But if you have high voltage distribution system, that's something which is mentioned kept in the technology part of it, which I didn't mention in detail. But in most developed countries, you've got high voltage distribution system, and in many private utilities, you are having now, even the West Bengal State Distribution Company is implementing high voltage distribution system in some areas. Now that reduces losses tremendously. Then you have only the LT line, which is the 230 volt line, is very short ones. The other ones are 11 kV lines where you have less losses. So you have small pole mounted transformers where it takes care of 5-6 houses. Presently, all the lines coming from the distribution transformer are 230 volt lines. But if you have a high voltage distribution system implemented, they'll bring down the losses to 6-7%, 7-8%.
Thank you.
I have a question about the new, the amendment, the electricity amendment bill. It
Yes,
proposes a separate national renewable energy policy in addition to the national electricity policy. So
right.
do you feel that this is the way to look at it? I mean, wouldn't there be at some stage these two policies could conflict or could overlap?
Right. So the demarcation of the jurisdiction of each policy has to be clear, sir. What renewable policy cannot say how the balancing should be done, because that balancing is a net of renewable plus load. So as well as grid stability cannot be under the renewable ministry because of renewable generation. So the renewable policy would only dictate about what they are about the RPOs and how much extent that is being done. So it should only cover that. We'll have to wait and see, because when this thing came up for discussion, we said, why do we need to have this? All they can ministry can say is to dictate how much RPOs the state should have. That's the only thing. They cannot start taking, because grid stability, all sources feed into the grid, and it cannot be grid stability dealt separately by renewables and separately by the power ministry for the conventional sources. So that jurisdiction is very important. We'll have to see the details. That's not come out exactly. This was discussed, 3, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years back, where we said you don't need a separate national renewable policy. I mean, they said even the Renewable Energy Act, in fact, which was, so we said that you cannot have, transmission is common for everybody. You cannot have different transmission system for renewables and different for this. So it's a thing we'll have to wait and see what exactly, but my sense is that it will not cover anything beyond RPO, that policy.
Thank you.
Mr. Batra, there are 2 questions that I will read out for you. Small questions, you can answer it quickly. Mr. Ray has written that electricity being in the concurrent list, I wonder how the union-state relationship or general negotiations affect these national policies on electricity being implemented, particularly states where government is not from the same party or center. So it's the federalism-related question. And
should I answer one by one? Because I forget.
Okay, sure.
Okay. So what I'm saying is, I mean, yes, that is right. It's a concurrent subject. But the thing which is now winning elections for people is the development agenda, and not necessarily opposing any other party. So, and all parties are going for development agenda. And what we've seen is that any state which has got development agenda, whether it belongs to one party or another, that party wins, has been winning elections 2-3 times. So I think now that will really bind people, because the policies which are being made by the center are in general beneficial. It's not something which is going against the states. Yes, the jurisdiction part because many states were taking it into and considered as encroachment to their own authority by denying certain things which were actually efficient. I think people have become wise on that, and they may not object that much to these things if they're kept in the loop, and it's done in a consensus sort of way. Which is the second one?
Yeah, the second one is Dr. Jyoti Prasad finally is writing, storage is emerging as one of the important measures to balance system with renewables. Vehicle to grid technology is emerging technology in this area that promotes electricity vehicles as well as storage both. Are these plans in the GOI policy to promote this?
Are these plans?
Are these plans in the Government of India policy to promote this? Are there plans to promote this?
plan to promote electric vehicles and
Vehicle to grid
storage.
technology and storage. Yeah.
Yes, yes. The planning commission. I mean, the Niti Aayog has taken out one thing where they encourage whether incentives for storage as well as electric vehicles, which is in the public domain. They also want to manufacture storage, electrochemical storage in India. And actually, one good thing which has happened with which electric vehicles will complement renewables is that they can act as a demand response. You know, whenever the generation of renewable goes down, the charging rate can reduce, so it will draw less power. And when it goes up, it can increase and it will draw more power. So it acts like a demand response that can go up and down. When it is charged in slow charging mode in the house, 90% of the charging around the world is through slow charging, and these vehicles are parked. So either in the house when you go to sleep, or in parking lots where your vehicle stays when you're in office. So these actually complement, and I think they'll do very well for both of these things to be implemented, which is good for the grid also.
Well, thank you. I think this was really very interesting set of presentations, and I'm delighted that we had good discussion on it also as well. And thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you all for Thank you all for joining. Yeah, there are a lot of questions in the question box, so